Hello again. Welcome back to another episode of Namtaro Talks. Today we are on episode 2, and the topic at hand is on-screen adaptations of books. This original topic was on the book subreddit. So after grad school, I've picked up my hobby of reading, well, really listening to audiobooks because the nature of my job requires a lot of driving. So I consume a lot of books, I have a lot of opinions about them. I write down what I read, I organize what I read, and sometimes I like to share my takes on it. Unfortunately, the book subreddit is quite pretentious, especially with the moderators. They are very nitpicky about the content that's posted, and they deleted many different posts of mine several times for the most arbitrary reasons. So it's okay. I have a new medium to share about the books now. Well, specifically today will be regarding adaptations of books, on-screen live adaptations, whether it's for movies or TV shows, whether it's animated or live action. I do appreciate a good on-screen adaptation of a book or book series every now and then. However, I feel like we are sometimes rolling the dice whenever an adaptation is announced because nowadays, well, okay, before, whenever there was an adaptation announced, we're like pretty excited about it. Like, wow, we just read this and now it's gonna be on screen, it's gonna be on TV, there's gonna be real actors and actresses, and we get to see what that world looks like, or what that, I don't know, magic spell or magical attack looks like, or if that moment in the book, we're gonna see how it translates onto a screen. Yeah, that was back then. Nowadays, whenever they announce it, we're like, oh my god, what if they butcher it? What if they miscast it? What if the director never read the book? What if the writers push their own agenda or try to take unnecessarily creative liberties? So, like I say, many factors come into a live screen adaptation because many factors have to line up very correctly. It has to be sometimes it's like a big budget studio or a small indie studio, but relatively reputable and at least respectful of the original material. Not only does the director matter, but the writers matter, the people who write the script, and pretty much from scene to scene, that matters. The casting is important also. You want especially if it's a actor or actress, you want them to resemble the characters in the book at least, not go way out of left field for no apparent reason or for arbitrarily, The budget must also be taken into account. It's understandable if it's a smaller studio and they have a limited budget. They work with what they have and you expect and respect it for what it is. However, sometimes budgets are unreasonably huge, or it becomes much more expensive than you would realize. And that comes into conflict because it involves reshoots and more CGI, or sometimes there's an audience test screening and it sucks, and you have to re-record scenes again, so that balloons the budget even more. And also, possible original author involvement. It is a hit or miss. Sometimes it's not always a guaranteed a good thing because sometimes the work, it was what it was. So even if the author was involved, it does not necessarily mean the movie or the show will be necessarily better, Or sometimes the author gets too involved and they get very nitpicky, or this scene has to be like that, this character has to act like that. But sometimes, like with little or no author involvement, everyone else just feels like they can do whatever they want willy-nilly to the story or the series. So that's another mixed bag. That's another can of worms you must consider when it comes to adaptations of a book. Some adaptations are faithful and created by people who truly cherish the original series and put forth the effort. They read the original books, they're familiar with the characters and the lore and the prose, and they have it in good faith to want to translate that onto the big screen, or whether it be movies or TV, as best as possible. However, there are also many adaptations where they are adapted with neglect, disrespect, or ulterior motives. The other day, I heard behind the scenes talk of the writers actively hating the original work. They completely disrespected and disregarded the original work and its author. If that's the case, then why become the writer for that adaptation in the first place? I'm very sure there's many other people who want your job, who are vying for your job. Sometimes in the middle of the adaptation, they are really deep in the hole, or they know it's gonna suck. They know there's too many problems on set. They know that no matter what direction they take, it's gonna be not a good product that they can be proud of and stand behind. But sometimes they just phone it in. They just wing it, but the damage is already done, and they cut their losses early. Other times, the works they continue to be bastardized to the point of abomination. Okay, abomination, and to the point of being unrecognized anymore. Like at that point, the book and the on-screen adaptation are, you could pretty much call it two completely different works. They might as well be named two different things. Or if they were two separate original ideas, that would have made a lot more sense. But sometimes it is so warped beyond recognition. When it's good, it's faithful, it's acclaimed, it is a slam dunk because it appeases like the original fans of the book, and they see the time and effort and respect put into it, but also it opens that book or world or IP to a whole new audience, like the general audience who never heard about it before. So it's a new introduction to them. Yeah, this is talking mainly about books, but the same could be applied for comic books or video games too. Because after seeing it on screen, you feel compelled to return to the original works, like see where the original story came from, what the original author was thinking. So, like, or see, oh, that's how this scene adapts from like the book and whatnot. But another mind-boggling thing that happens every now and then is that sometimes a work is adapted with acclaim, favorability, and even accolades, yet it is prematurely canceled anyway because that work supposedly failed to reach some sort of unreasonable metrics. Yeah, because sometimes the acting is on par and the world building is respectable, and people are beginning to understand and warm up to the series. And yeah, arbitrarily canceled because it wasn't quote unquote successful enough. People didn't like it enough. It wasn't popular enough. Not many people tuned in. But what if they did? But what more do you want? And sometimes it's quality, right? That should be first and foremost. And if you cut it prematurely, it's a cliffhanger ending. Like for example, if a series of 5 or 7 books, but the first 2 seasons, 1 or 2 seasons only adapt a couple of books, you leave the audience, or pretty much the consumer is frustrated because the people who first discovered this series, they're like, what happens next? And you can just go, oh, go read the book. But sometimes they're not as compelled to read the book. Also, the people who had been faithful to the original series, it feels incomplete. It doesn't really provide a sense of closure. Yeah. For example, pretend that there were 7 Harry Potter books. Okay, you don't have to pretend that. But pretend that they only adapted maybe 2 or 3 of the movies, and that's it. And it's not because the third movie is bad. It didn't sell as well, or it wasn't as critically acclaimed. Maybe it was, I don't know, 70% instead of 80%. And they just quit making Harry Potter movies from then on. How would Harry Potter fans feel? Like people who read the books, people who first watched the movies. It just feels like little to no closure, just incomplete. And unfortunately, another thing that does happen is that if a book has a failed or subpar adaptation, it diminishes the chances of that same said work's attempt of being adapted again in the future. Because that's like maybe that one shot it ever got, and they screwed it up. Like, what are the odds that they would try to adapt it again, whether it be a few decades later or a generation later, when there's always the next new thing or the next old IP down the pipeline to be adapted? So whenever one is taking a chance to do an adaptation, they gotta treat it with more care and consideration, because this is someone's life's work. This is a story that's been established with characters and lore and plots, and they wanted to see it translated accordingly. And if you butcher it, then that butchered version is what some people, that's their impression of it pretty much forever until another adaptation comes along later. But that is rarely, if ever, the case. I don't expect adaptations to be completely perfect or follow the original work to a T, but I still expect an honest attempt to capture the original themes, message, and spirits of the original work. Of course, creative tweaks will be expected during the live action or on screen adaptations, but there shouldn't be too many changes or too drastic changes, or the changes shouldn't be too distracting or taking away from the original work. Because the people who are involved in the adaptations, they should quote unquote know their place. Because if you're making your own original work with your own original stories and ideas, that's a different story. Then you can go nuts and do whatever you want, however you want. But if you are adapting an established work, like by an author who put their heart and soul into it, who had their own vision of it, and if you completely pervert that vision, then nobody's happy. The author is not happy. The fans won't be happy. The audience won't be happy. I am not saying that they have to strictly adapt and do not put themselves into their work. I'm just saying that putting themselves into their work should not be the priority, you know? I mean, you can have a little hint here and there. It's a nice touch, but it shouldn't be the emphasis. The emphasis should be the original work, what it stood for, what it stood on, the author's vision. For shows or movies that were well received and part of an original series, but the rest of the works were canceled anyways, some of those authors said that they were grateful that their works were adapted at all in the first place, and that they appreciated the honest attempt. However, that should not be the standard. The standard should be introducing the works and the lore to the new audience, yet keeping faith with the original fans and the original creator. And if possible, or ideally, finish the story, adapt the full story. I know that sometimes things get lost in translation, or maybe interest wanes a little bit, but if that's the case, then if you're scared of adapting, then why adapt at all? You gotta be steadfast in your vision, you know? You have a body of work to refer to, and and after that you trust your own ability to adapt it accordingly. And I know sometimes like the higher ups and the executives and the board members, they have their own opinions and they have more authority. They want to do this and that. But that's when the creative team has to stand strong, stand steadfast. And in the ideal world, they would say no. Like, this is what the audience wants. This is what the original fans want. This will be how you attract a new audience. But unfortunately, in the real world, that's not the case. And the executives and CEOs and the board, they have final say in most decisions. Also, you do not want to ever get to the point where if the adaptation is successful, yet it detracts so far from the original work, it is disheartening for the original creator. Because at that point, you are completely casting him out to the side, even though he is the reason that live action work or on-screen production occurred in the first place. At that point, all he can do is lament, it's not my work anymore. Also, the debate between live action and animation continues. Yes, so we understand that adaptations from the written word onto the screen is expensive, but live action, depending on how much CGI is used, is usually more expensive, labor intensive, and time consuming. But unfortunately, whatever the cost of live action, the cost of animation would likely be even more than that. Live action is typically limited to the constraints of set and costume design, real world places, and casting choices of whom actors and actresses, they will grow older or change their appearances, or they might discontinue with the project for any given reason. Yeah, animation, of course, allows for much more freedom, flexibility, and creativity. However, it further requires a clearer vision as it establishes the aesthetic of the character and the atmosphere of the world building. So, animation it has a greater responsibility because it is not an actor or actress or a real life place or some CGI that defines that world, that character, that pretty much that image of the original work. It has to come from it's that is a bit more from scratch, you know. Well, to be honest, I had a whole nother segment where I would list several of the works that I consumed and their on-screen adaptations and my opinion of them and how I would categorize them. But alas, after 2 episodes, I've come to realize that this is more tiring and time consuming than I expected. So I would likely save that segment to another episode. It could be the next one or it could be somewhere down the line. But it's in the pipeline. We'll see. Who knows? I might even add more onto this list. Well, anyways, thanks for listening to the second episode. And like I said, we'll see where this goes. All right, thank you. See you next time.